to be here. That's good. Pleased to be here today and see such a well-attended event. I recognise some of the faces, but not all. Hopefully we can get to chat later on during a break or something. I was asked by Yoshi to talk about the challenges that telecom operators are facing with their telco cloud ambitions, and what ETSI NFV can do about it. So it's quite a tall task that he set for me. And I obviously don't work for a telecom operator, so I'm not day to day facing the challenges that you are. And so the way I thought I could perhaps address this topic was to reach out to some contacts of mine in the industry and get perspectives from the outside, from people who aren't deeply involved in the ETSI NFV group itself, and see what their thinking is, and whether that's of any use or relevance in guiding your own work program. So if we can advance to the next slide. So I thought this was a great diagram from a recent white paper by the ETSI NFV group that tried to sort of compare some of the different projects that were ongoing at the same time. From an outsider's perspective, it can get a bit confusing. Where's the overlap between what NFV is trying to do and what ETSI NFV is already doing? And silver, is that perhaps competing with other initiatives like ANUCAS? It can often get a bit confusing from the outside. And so this diagram was a useful way of trying to frame this. And it was a starting point for the questions that I thought I could ask my industry contacts. If we go to the next slide, these are the questions that I thought were pertinent. So the one I've been asked to address was why are telcos still struggling with this fragmentation of telco cloud, so a vertical stack for each application system, rather than one horizontal stack that's common across the whole network. And again, wasn't that meant to solve some of these problems? Clearly it hasn't. Why not? Similarly, silver. That's an initiative it's not that long, it's not as old as ETSI NFV itself, but it's been around for a while. Is that the way forward? Nefio is a project that there was a lot of excitement about when it was first announced. It's coming up to, I think, 2 years now. There's a commercial offering available from Google. Is that perhaps the way forward? Question 5 is a hard-hitting question. Is ETSI NFV still relevant? I think the acronym NFV itself has got some baggage, some negative connotations to it, and that's often perhaps misapplied to the work that ETSI NFV is doing. And then finally, are all of these efforts to try and come up with a telco cloud solution, are they really worth it? Is perhaps the easy way out just to partner with a public cloud provider? They can provide their stack on-premise in a sort of Amazon outpost kind of scenario. You can burst into their centralized cloud if you need the capacity. Is that an easier way forward? So these are perhaps naive questions, but by putting naive questions out and hearing the answers, I hope to learn something. So if we go to the next slide, these are the people that I reached out to. So some of them are currently working for major telecom operators. Some of them have left to go to a different role, and often that allows them perhaps to speak more freely than when they are still wearing the badge of their telco operator. A couple of consultants, so similar to myself, outsiders looking in on the industry, and vendors who perhaps have their own agendas, but also have deep expertise and experience of some of the problems that their customers are facing. So let's look at the answers. If we go on to the next slide. A lot of text here, which I'll leave you to digest. In fact, the question 1 answers span onto a couple of pages. But let's just focus on the bits in bold. So it's a huge effort to certify all of the different vendors on a horizontal cast. It's a lot of work involved. Second point, there's not enough skills, not enough people within the telecom operator, within the operations department, have the requisite skills in cloud technologies. Third point, domain owners resist this concept of horizontal cloud. So if I'm in charge of packet core within a mobile operator, The IT department might come along and say, we've got this great idea for a horizontal cloud. If my vendor tells me that the core is only going to work on their particular stack the way they've configured it, I'm going to go with that. I'm afraid that seems to be the reality. And the last point on this slide is, I don't think the operations teams have got enough willpower to force the vendors to use a horizontal stack. So again, there's sort of conflict between what's easiest for the vendor and what's best for the operator, for the customer. If we go to the next slide. The traditional vendors just haven't built their software right. So they've taken what was the physical network function, the appliance, they've very simplistically virtualized it, and then perhaps they've broken it apart into microservices. But the software still isn't correctly architected to work in this new paradigm. Second point, I see little interest in using vendor clouds, I'm not quite sure what it means here, to house core infrastructure, but for customer-facing services, telcos are using the vendor infrastructures. I have to say I'm a bit confused on that response. And the third point is, in the absence of a harmonised, standards-based telecom domain model or ontology, old-fashioned development methods prevail. So a slightly long-winded response there from one of the people I polled who did want their name to be read out, Enterprise Web. We go to the next question, or answers to the next question on the next slide. Aniket. So one response here was that it's used by many telcos as a reference rather than a prescription. I personally am not sure what they meant by that, what the difference is. It has not helped that Microsoft and AWS haven't participated in Aniket, so that's something that they think is perhaps detracted from the project's success. Vendors are just not interested in harmonising, says one consultant. Who cares, says Enterprise Web, very outspoken small company. CTO teams don't own the purchasing decisions, and they're required that are required to force vendors to adopt it. So they're not seemingly in charge of the decision, and they can't push Aniket on the vendors. If we go to the next slide. What about silver? Maybe it's coming a bit late. That's a somewhat harsh criticism, I think. It's still quite early days for telco cloud. Not much appetite outside of the EU, which is fair enough. It's an initiative led by a handful of European operators. Perhaps the rest of the world feels excluded. On the other hand, they can use this idea of EU sovereignty to try and force the vendors to comply. The fourth point, if it's all built with Red Hat, why not just use that? So a skeptic. And the last point, similarly skeptical, they see it as superfluous. It's a somewhat harsh criticism there for silver. These are outside perspectives, they're not my own. Not saying these are right, but I have tried to sample views of different people. If you go to the next slide. What about Nefio? Is that more popular? Telcos are slow to introduce new technologies. That's why Nefio hasn't taken off yet. My previous employer was a big supporter. It's really just a loose infrastructure-facing framework. Again, who cares? From the very outspoken Enterprise Web. Anything that's reliant on open source for telco operational delivery is problematic. So a skeptic there of open source in general. Slightly more positive, there's some early interest, says one consultant. And finally, from another vendor, they talk about not being comfortable in choosing anything other than large vendors. Nefio is so different from the ETSI Nano approach that CTO office is not comfortable with it. And Nefio's choice of going with Kubernetes operators instead of Helm is a challenge for network function vendors. They're not used to that paradigm. So these are some of the reasons that people say why Nefio hasn't solved all of these problems. If we go to the next slide. This is the hard hitting question. So I've got two slides here with the answers. Is ETSI NFV still relevant? And if not, what can they do? What should they do? So one very harsh opinion there. I won't read it all out, but they think it's irrelevant since 2014. Somebody else thinks it's not just irrelevant, but it's treated with scorn. The third point's equally negative, mostly irrelevant at this point. The best thing it can do is to support Silver and Nefio. Let's go to the next slide and see if there's any more balanced views out there. As far as I know, it is still used. This is from a Tier 1 North American telecom operator. So it's not negative, but it's not overtly positive. It's not saying, yes, we're using it, I'm sure we're using it, I use it every day. It's as far as I know. The reference architecture has been tremendously useful. However, there's a however here, it's too heavy to be of practical use. The guidance or the recommendation is move to cloud native and become a lot lighter, whatever that means. I'm sure you'll believe that these are things you're already doing. So these perceptions from the outside perhaps haven't caught up with reality. And the last bullet here, ETSI NFV should focus on what the cloud guys are doing and hardening it for a telco world. So again, you may see these points and think, yeah, we're doing that, but that message perhaps hasn't gone out to all of, certainly to the people who've responded to my survey. We go to the next slide. This was the sort of, okay, let's give up and just give it all to the public cloud providers to see if they can sort out this problem for us. The feedback there was keeping it in-house, keeping the telco cloud in-house gives you much more control. That's the sort of common answer that we hear from telecom operators. It might be because that person is it's critical to their job, so they're almost sort of justifying their existence. But generally speaking, it seems to be a widely held view that it gives you more control. A hybrid architecture, so perhaps using a mixture of public and private, they think that that's the pattern going forward. And the third bullet on this slide, Kubernetes and related tools handle things below the cluster, but they don't do anything above the cluster. So again, a very long-winded, complicated message here about needing some sort of management system on top, which is essentially what ETSI NFV's role could be. On the next slide, please. So here, the feedback on this question, the hyperscalers have built the right tools. So they think that is perhaps the answer. However, second bullet point, we can't rely on them entirely. So I was reading something today about in Germany, for example, there are only 8 Azure sites in Frankfurt, and a German operator would probably need 15 data centers around the country to host their packet call. So just using public cloud wouldn't be good enough. The last point here for edge, yes. Public cloud could be the answer. However, for a centralized cloud, that's not so clear. We go to the next slide. So I've used up a lot of time here, I apologise. But summing up, the feedback that I received from those questions were that telecom operators, they've got different preferences, they can't all agree on the same approach, which is an impediment to standardisation, obviously. The network function vendors, they've also been challenged to actually virtualize their appliances and make them work with lots of different cloud stacks. So they take the easiest approach. They say, no, for me to guarantee that the system will work, it needs to use this particular custom stack. It doesn't fit in with your plans for a horizontal approach. Ensuring that applications like Packet Core IMS work reliably, that's more important to CTO office than this concept of the horizontal cloud. If they have to make a choice between the two, they're going to go for reliable applications, even if it means more operational cost, more work, and higher capex potentially. ETSI NFV tried to standardise what was a very unfamiliar and rapidly evolving technology. The industry direction switched towards this microservices and Kubernetes-based approach, and the acronym NFV has become mired in sort of the negative connotations. And I have read in some of your discussions and your blogs about whether you should maybe change the name of the group from ETSI NFV to ETSI Telco Cloud or something like that. That's, people will be sceptical about just changing a name, but the acronym NFV does have a lot of negative baggage, as I say. De facto standards have emerged, so Red Hat OpenShift, for example, is a very common system used for packet call. And finally, what could ETSI NFV be best placed doing, according to the small sample of individuals that I surveyed? So they suggest things like providing guidance to the CNCF about the telecom industry's specific needs, supporting other industry initiatives like NEFIA with Silver that we touched upon, and identifying how public cloud can best be used to support network functions hosting. So that was the feedback. I hope the survey results give you some pause for thought, some ideas. They may appear challenging, but hopefully your plan, your program is robust enough to stand up to that challenge and face those criticisms. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the rest of the session today. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening. Thank you.
So any questions? So we have 10 minutes.
Like 10 minutes, okay.
Oh, I thought I'd gone off lightning down without questions.
All right. Thank you, James. So I think it's fair and neutral feedback we received from your survey. Thank you. So I ask you some feedback from my perspective. So as far as I understood, we understand so many new innovation technology. For example, public cloud, they are hyperscalers, they are very distributed. But as far as I understood, it's pretty not easy to migrate from the today's telecom functionality into the public cloud because it's not easy. So today we haven't heard many really big, surprising, and successful story here. So I think that must have some reasons. So I would like to share my understanding about the reasons. For example, there are huge organizations like 3GPP. They are today they are building network functionality much complicated. I mean, there's so tens of thousands of people there working on the millions and thousands of the pages. Such network functionality has been defined in order to guarantee their international roaming and interoperability and even multi-vendor. So this is the I think this is the one of the reasons I see today it's not easy to really let telecom now function simplify like IT applications. They can steadily, they can easily migrate. So I think that is probably the major reason. And without changing that, I think it's really hard to think about think about all it's built for. And I mean, it's kind of new directions, right? So I think we cannot stop people to think of beauty, right? Even we think, okay, it's not realistic. I think everybody in this room, you could. So we are looking at the beauty of the technical cloud native new technologies, innovation and cloud. But I think I personally feel ETSI is more like the balance of this kind of dream and realistic. So this is the first point I want to mention because it's a huge basis of 3GPP based telecom functions. The second thing, I think there are strong reliability requirements, which today have scalers like performance it still has some gaps. So there are, I understand they have some reliability, but requirements different. We have telecom levels requirement for some availability and performance, but they are different understanding of the availability and performance. So this kind of, different understanding We cannot just copy from one side to other. So based on this two observation, I personally feel for telecom sectors here, we need to consider something to get something from the new technology, from the new innovation, from hyperscaler to enter into our telecom sectors. This has not happened first time. I mean, this has happened by 3GP before. 3GP did the same thing. They are not really innovating anything new or big, but they are the really good user of the new technology. So I don't think the telecom organization has changed so much today. Still, there are different departments responsible for different operations, such hierarchical architectures, structures. So because of that, so two observations. One possibility to bring the new technology into telecom sector. I think the solution part will be standard, will be the place for this. We can not only get the new technology, but also we need to consider something we are different or we are unique. So this is my observation. I have no strong opinion. We should support those new technologies. I think we are not only support them, but also we need help them to become the possibility, otherwise they are always in the building, but never come to the ground. So this is my discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, all very good points. I mean, it is always a temptation to think that one's industry is unique and special, and so we must do things differently to the way the rest of the world, the way that other enterprises do things. I think on the whole now, most telcos seem to have a public cloud first approach when it comes to IT systems, OSS and BSS. When it comes to network functions, yes, it's still different. And in fact, there's still even resistance to moving towards software-based network functions instead of appliances. But that's a debate that's still ongoing. But on the whole, I would just say try to resist being as different to other industries as possible. So there might be some particular aspects and particular systems that yes, they do have special needs. But on the whole, as much as possible, try to make common with other industries. Your banking has a lot of security, a lot of regulation, a lot of performance requirements, and they seem to be comfortable using more generic standards. So appreciate the need for telecom-specific things, but we should be very careful to do that as little as possible and as much as possible. Enjoy the economies of scale of generic IT that's been invented by others and is a commodity. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just one. Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, James. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that it's a very polarized world, where you have on one hand the hyperscalers, let's say, they don't care about standards, the open source community focusing about de facto standards that provide a solution and it will become the standard, and the rest of the world, let's say more mainly the telco, ETSI and so on, more standard centric. Do you see that as a reality, and what could be the future of that?
It's an interesting observation. I mean, clearly the three major public cloud providers have reached such scale, such a combined market share in that industry, certainly in the US and Western Europe, that they don't need standardization. They certainly don't want interoperability between their platforms. They want they wouldn't obviously use the term lock-in, but they want to make their system as favourable as possible, that you wouldn't want to go elsewhere. It does seem as though enterprises on the whole are still liking to have a mix, to have some combination of public cloud providers. However, over time that could well change. They could decide to go all in, just as you do with certain enterprise IT applications. You just go with one provider, and there's no point in complicating your life. The open source movement is quite distinct, and there are certain projects. Obviously, if you are within an enterprise and you're building applications, you will leverage open source for all sorts of little things. But I don't think it's as important a part of your overall IT effort or spend, certainly, as commercial applications. I think it's at the margin. It's a bit of a hobbyist area to some degree. So in terms of economic importance, I don't think it's ever going to be as important as the others. The standards, standards still obviously have a huge importance, particularly for things like roaming, particularly for systems where you have different components or layers and you want interoperability so that you have choice of supplier rather than monolithic systems coming from a small number of suppliers. But there are costs. If you standardise everything and you're selecting every single component in a system, it just puts more cost and time on you as the operator to get it to work. So there's a trade-off there between vendor lock-in and having a small amount of choice, or having this nirvana of all interoperability and this huge choice of components that you can put together to make it in a way that's unique to you. That's a very costly approach, and we're somewhere in the middle between those two extremes.
Thank you, James.
Thank you very much.